What's going on, everybody? Look, we had a decent time today, but we have a lot to do with Kierkegaard. He's my favorite, so I'll probably talk a lot about him more than some other folk. I didn't like Heidegger, so I left him alone. So, for me, Kierkegaard kind of stands out as the first existentialist thinker and author of the 19th century, right? Um, so he's kind of removed from the others who's late 18th, I mean late 19th, early 20th. But he's not only removed in time, but in some cases in place too, right? I mean, we talked France, we talked Germany. Now we're going to talk Denmark, right? Kierkegaard is a Dutch brother, and I think intellectually, along with Dostoevsky in certain respects, he is the type of existentialist whose thought is, locked into or kind of horned, um, horned up with God, and a kind of existentialist theology of sort. Kierkegaard is a complex thinker, um, and so I'll just try to kind of extract a few points as background to add to what we talked about in class today. Um, yeah, yeah, just to add to. I was like I said, he was a Danish brother, died early. People don't really know what the reasons of his death was. Like I said, so with a short life, he certainly was a major figure in Danish intellectual history. And then after death, the kind of status just kind of kept growing, right? Um, sort of, you know, he kind of engaged Hegel. Obviously, we saw that a little bit today. Um, and Kant. Obviously, you saw a little bit of that today. Um, but he didn't really like abstract theory, right? He kind of favored more concrete human reality and the, sort of in the um, sort of dire importance of commitments to something and personal choices. Um, he has a lot of different intellectual interests: religious, theological, literary. Um, but that's why it's different, right? The religious and the theological makes him different from the other ones we've read so far, unlike maybe Dostoevsky, right? And so there's enough overlap to kind of think about other existentialists as you kind of read him. I mean, Simone, and the idea of a love ethic or a care ethic. Um, Certainly, you'll see some Dostoevsky in here. Um, Camus to a certain extent with the question of absurdity and how to reconcile. um, like I said, he was a deeply complex thinker with sort of many different aspects to his thought. Um, he used pseudonyms, as you saw in this reading, and others. He uses pseudonyms, um, which means that at some level, trying to maintain a sort of a fixed or final position of thought would be a misrepresentation of sort, almost like Plato, right? Um, his life is like all of us, us who espouse to existentialism. Life is complex, convoluted, and his philosophy is a lot like that as well, right? Um, so the text we're kind of engaged in, right, is Fear and Trembling from 1843, I believe, and engages sort of directly with the religious and theological issue, namely God's command to Abraham to kill his only son Isaac And as we talked about today, Abraham resolves to do just that. But at the moment before he does it, right, God stops him, and we see this as a powerful test of faith, right? Kierkegaard sort of regards commitments and or as important, and analyses sort of complex and diverse. Our analysis needs to be complex and diverse in our sort of interpretation. Um, Obviously, in Fear and Trembling, the title itself comes from a biblical kind of adage, and maybe even one could argue is the way how that religion, God, and other sort of theological existential interpretations and considerations kind of invade his thought, right? Or affect his thought, or maybe infect his thought, right? I don't really, probably won't get into it, in too much at all, but, we may be able to say something like that, right? But I'd rather kind of stick with this question, right? He makes a point that early on before your reading, so I promised I would get here. If there were no internal consciousness, this is him talking, if there were no internal consciousness in a man, if at the bottom of everything, Kierkegaard says, there was only a sort of a wild ferment, a power that twisting in the dark passions produced everything greater inconsequential. Sounds like Nietzsche, right? If an unfathomable sort of insatiable emptiness, Kierkegaard says, lay hidden beneath everything, what would life be? I love that question. Again, I just read again. If there was no internal consciousness in a man, if at the bottom of everything there was a wild ferment, a power that twisting in dark passions produced everything great or inconsequential, if an unfathomable, insatiable emptiness lay hidden beneath everything, what then would life be? For Kierkegaard is despair. So there's a sense to which this captures the main essence of what we've been doing all semester, right? And it kind of reappears throughout other thinkers that we've read, right? Dostoevsky, Nietzsche's Death of God, Dostoevsky's Everything is Permitted, Sartre's sort of useless passion, right? But here is one of the first to forcefully, bravely, and quite seriously consider the possibility that maybe there is not a higher power, there is no other external objective consciousness or truth guiding us and securing us, but only passionate power. Again, like I was talking to Phil in class today when he was saying, well, he's above God when he talks about the idea of the absolute. He said, I don't know. But he says God is above the objective. God is above the universal. But maybe for him, maybe there is no eternal objective consciousness. Our consciousness needs to be one with God. Right? Not God guiding us, not as you said, a teleos where we are trying to get like God. We must be one with God. And maybe what that means, especially those of us who have been tied into Western philosophy a lot, Maybe that means there is no real order of truth. There is no, the human life and significance is ultimately a insatiable emptiness or a sense of despair. Of course, I mean, I don't know. There have been philosophers before, even Kierkegaard, who talked about these type of things, but Kierkegaard asks, after the human feelings and consequences, what does it mean for us to be valuing satiable feeling beings? And in this sense, we owe a lot to Kierkegaard. We may not all have the same feeling, but many of us have. We typically have the tendency to gloss over it. And even Kierkegaard wants to return to and promote faith, but not sort of ambiguous faith, but very direct, specific faith. So maybe we should ask, what if we dwell with this issue, with what question seriously? What does it mean if there were a situation, and how we would get along with everything? Really be in despair, or could it open up a space for something creative and good? Well, I think that's what Kierkegaard's kind of existentialism tries to go. And so the quotation I gave to you kind of embodies the spark of a movement, right? And there's something about individual passions, seductions, creativity, that needs to kind of be analyzed and taken seriously. That's why we like Nietzsche in that regard too. So on one level, on one hand, Kierkegaard highlights sort of peril, sort of an anxious objectivity that is felt so powerfully, and is also open to a great life of pleasure and pain and passion and seduction. But on the other hand, I think what's equally important to him, both in theory and in practice, as we talked about today, are the societal demands, the social demands that of ethics. And that with ethics it builds objectivity and what? Stability. But as he says, that sense of social order suffocates and crushes the individual at will, constantly puts them in sinful situations. So for Kierkegaard, philosophy kind of ignored this sort of passion, this highly problematic tension for much too long. And maybe his life, as short as it was a way of trying to correct it intellectually. Kierkegaard's philosophy explores this in detail and in earnest, sort of concretely. And he ultimately says it takes a leap of faith and a subsequent reconciliation in faith, in religion, and in God. But the beauty and interest of Kierkegaard is that he acknowledges the possibility of a deep and angst-ridden nothingness, abyss, that we can quite possibly succumb to and fall into. And thus, in a way, he raises from an existential perspective maybe even more questions than he has answers, which, as a philosopher, is not a bad thing. He was well known, a bit of an eccentric dude in his time, and like I said, unfortunately, he died too early. And through the years, his stature, sort of who he is, if you will. I forgot the word I want to use. His lore. That's the word. His lore just got bigger and bigger and steady and more steady and grown. Like I said, most schools of theology teaches him. So many students and experts have dedicated a lot of time to his work of aesthetics, his moral work, and of course, his theology. So that's a little bit, obviously he influenced a lot of other thinkers, because he was one of the first to get to and to sort of dwell on that powerful and sort of unsettling human feeling of a brute, uncontrollable existence. All right, I give you a bigger lecture tomorrow, on the reading. It's a little bit of background, what I think about it. All right, I just want to throw that out there real quick in case you had a little free time at night to think about it. Take care.